So I want to try to share with you today what I've been learning about the dimensions. And I want to try to explore them all the way from first dimension through 12th dimension, and maybe even a little beyond that. And there's just a few things I want to remind us all first before we jump in and start exploring them. One of them is that we are going to go rather quickly through this, and it did take me quite a long time to gain an understanding enough to present this material to you in the way that I'm going to do it. So if you don't understand it at first, give it a chance and see what you think. I want to remind us all also that my whole model of reality stems from what I talked about in my other video, and that is a model for time. And again, I'm holding a representation of that in my hand here. The model, again, says that time is a mirror, and not an ordinary mirror, but a folding mirror, as we talked about before. And so everything that I'm seeing from looking into time, and I can't escape that in this reality. And so it would mean essentially that I'm talking to you, but I'm doing so like this. I'm doing so looking into the space-time arrangement, and in this arrangement I see three dimensions in front of me. I see height, width, and depth. I perceive past, present, and future. I have a space-time gravity experience. And so as I'm trying to interpret that and look past the third dimension, which is what I can see with my eyes and perceive in these other ways, I'm actually trying to see what from this arrangement is behind my head. And so it's an interpretation of an interpretation. So what I'm trying to say is, in a nutshell, this isn't the way things are. This is just the way things look. And it's only the way they look from this model, and it's only the way they look from this model in my interpretation of that. And so with that, I would like to just jump into first dimension and begin exploring. So I want to start us here with this diagram. This is an overview of everything that we're going to talk about in a rather crude way. But there are 12 of these rings on this diagram, and so from where this talks, first dimension begins here in the innermost ring, and we're going to work our way out all the way to 12th dimension and see if we can't even just go a little bit further than that. And from where this talks, the way we go from dimension to dimension to dimension, from first outward, is we go an increasing order of magnitude. So one way to say this when we start in first dimension is we can start very, very small, the smallest, something that might be able to be a definition of everything that is. Before we go on and start into this, I just want to say also that there is no one way to do this. There is no one definition for any of these dimensions. In fact, when you choose a definition for, let's say, first dimension, that definition tends to define other dimensions that are related to that train of thought from first out. And so as you'll see, we're going to start in first dimension here. And in first dimension, what we're looking for is a possible definition of everything, if there could be such a thing. If everything could break down to a single something, everything that is, everything that we experience, everything that we see perhaps, we want that to be our starting place in first dimension. And the model that I just showed you a few minutes ago with the folding mirrors is a model for time. And if the model holds true, then time is where we are, and time is where we're looking, and so time qualifies as a definition for first dimension, because from where I'm talking from, everything I see, everything I experience is time. And even from the model that I showed you, time, again, is a mirror, and what a mirror does is reflect light. And it would mean that another possible definition of first dimension could actually be light itself. And there are other theories out there that talk about holographic universes. And in particle theory, when we go from matter down to atoms, down to subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we try to go even further down than that, what we ultimately reach is the smallest stable particle that we theorize to exist, and that actually is something we call a photon, and so a particle of light, if there is such a thing. And so another possible definition of first dimension could be photon. Another somewhat similar theory imagines first dimension, the basic building blocks of everything that is, to be something they call superstrings. Superstrings are theorized to be one-dimensional rings of energy that make up everything that is. The definition that I'm after, and the one that I want to pursue in our train of thought, says that first dimension is actually consciousness itself. And so that would say everything that is in this place is a form of consciousness. So whether it's the rocks, whether it's the trees, whether it's the birds, or the sky, or the oceans, or the space itself and the time itself, the light itself is all forms of consciousness. So moving on from first dimension, and remembering that we're going to be following this train of thought through, we're going to go on to second dimension. And I'm going to start again with our model, because as you remember from the folding mirror, when I unfold the mirror, I come to a representation that we know of as space-time, or the space-time continuum. And a way to interpret that in this diagram is something inside of something. So a big picture and a little picture. And from this definition, the little picture is the space picture. The big picture is the time picture, because again, time was encompassing of everything. And something else that has just happened in second dimension, we could call differentiation. Differentiation is just saying that there are now two somethings. There's something and there's something else. And one of the explanations this model claims that happens in second dimension, if we started with, let's just say, a photon, is that the photon copies itself in a mirror. So this, another way to say this is something and a copy of the something, that it happened in this mirror arrangement. Another crude example of this that we might all be able to identify with has to do with our own physical bodies once again, because by our perception, we all started out as a single cell. And then the first thing that happened was that cell made a copy of itself and split into two cells. And at that point, there was really no way to tell the difference between the original cell and the copy. And both of those cells went on separate journeys. This one went to divide again and again and again, and so did this one. But yet they were also both on the same train ride. In fact, from my lifetime perspective, they're still on the same train ride, because somewhere in this thing are the repercussions of what happened here between first and second dimension. Another definition of this energy signature, if you've watched any of my other videos, is something I call analog. An analog is a representation of something that has two poles. And believe it or not, all of our troubles in this place have to do with this energy signature and this perception. And part of the reason for that is because I can only suggest to you that this is also the energy signature of an illusion that I am trying to make sense of. And so something that happens in second dimension, when we explore this just a little bit further, you will see, is that interpretation becomes reality here. Now, other ways to interpret second dimension, when we take photon to the next order of magnitude, we come to another perception of particles that we know of as subatomic. And what I have drawn here is a representation that we perceive of the simplest atom, the hydrogen atom, which is comprised in our perception of a single proton and a single electron. So we haven't even reached neutron here yet, but neutron is a perception of a particle from particle theory that we perceive in the subatomic world. Again, we have differentiation, protons and electrons, but we also could see from this diagram, we also have a something inside of a something, a reality bubble inside of a reality bubble. Nested awareness, one inside of the other. Here is yet another representation of a two-pole perception of our universe. In this diagram, I'm showing quasars and black holes as